technical difficulty. Hi, everyone. I'm Eduardo Ojeda.
Good
I
to
am
see
in
you. Thanks for being
beautiful
here.
Miami.
Okay,
Good to see you
so
guys.
welcome everyone from around the world. I'm really thrilled you're here and thrilled to see such worldwide or at least Western Hemisphere participation. Um, we're talking today about a word that gets thrown around a lot, which is transformation. Many organizations think they're transforming when they're actually just changing faster. And the difference, as we'll see today, is that change modifies what's already there. Transformation alters what's possible. So by the end of this session, you'll see why transformation isn't about doing more or doing better. It's about shifting who you're being as a leader and as an organization. So let's start with so I'm a firm believer that there are three keys to learning on a webinar. One is listening. One is watching, being on camera, and the other is participating. So we'll start right off with participating and do a quick pulse check. When you put this in the chat, please, when you think of transformation, do you think of change, growth, or something else? Put your response in the chat. Do you think of change, growth, or something else? Eduardo says change. Alan says content versus context. Kevin says becoming something different. Victor, something else from one state to another. Says both change and growth evolving. I believe it's sort of reforming and big adjustment, context shift. Got it. Very good. So right away we can see there are different interpretations, and that tension is what we'll unpack today. So most of you, at least many of you know me, but just to establish who I am and how I get to talk about this, I'm the founder of Integrated Business Solutions. We've been around since 1998, and I was a partner in Generative Leadership Group before that. My latest book, which this series is going to be based on, is called Transformation from Potential to Practice. And if you look at Tal Ronan, you'll see the cover behind him. Thank you, Tal. I have been doing this for over 40 years, coaching and consulting with senior leaders worldwide. I call what I do culture by design and accountability with compassion. Advisor to CEOs, founders, and executive teams across a wide variety of industries at this point after being in the business as long as I have. What I've seen again and again is that most organizations do not have a culture problem. They have a leadership context problem. Strategy, structure, process can't compensate for a culture that is limiting and that's there by default and unexamined. When leaders consciously design context, accountability stops feeling like policing. Engagement becomes self-driven, and performance, trust, and alignment accelerate. By the way, if you have, as we go along, we'll have time for some Q&A at the end, but as we go along, if you have a question, either raise your hand or put it in chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. Just checking to make sure I think everybody's in the waiting room. Nope. Here we go. Good morning, Becky.
There.
Is it Eli or Eli?
Eli Alon.
Haley, I suspect you're Tal's fault as well.
Yes, a
Good.
couple of them are
Welcome.
here.
Welcome here. So, continuing along. I can get the slides to change. There we go. So why does this matter? It matters because culture is never neutral. It's either there by design or it's there by default. And if you leave culture to chance, you'll get whatever mix of habits and assumptions your history happens to produce. But if you design it, you can make culture your operating system, the thing that powers every strategy, every relationship, every result. If you're not clear what I mean by culture, I'll give you a very useful metaphor. If I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in the United States, when you go to the supermarket, they play music over the speaker system. And you don't notice it, but if the store is not very busy, they'll play slow music and you'll go slower because you'll unconsciously time yourself to the music. If the store is very busy and they want to move people through, they'll play fast music. And that's how culture operates. Culture, whether it's examined or not, creates a music that we dance to. So, what are we going to cover today? Well, for one thing, you'll get a clearer view of why culture is never neutral. It's never neutral in that it establishes the boundaries of what's possible for an individual and for an organization. So you'll get a clearer view of that. You'll leave here with a framework for shifting context, not just content. Context is an alternative term to culture, to drive sustainable change. You will get practical tools to build accountability with compassion. To hold people to high standards. It's interesting. You'll all receive this. I just wrote a paper about accountability and how it functions in different cultures. And I used two examples I use in there of cultures where accountability has to be approached differently than we do in the United States. One is Sweden, and the other is Botswana. In other cultures like Australia and Canada, where there's a strong relational component to the culture, and where oftentimes there's what the Australians call the tall poppy syndrome, which is anyone who stands out from the crowd like a poppy that stands above the field gets their head cut off. Compassion has to be, or accountability has to be approached much differently than in an aggressive, my characterization, culture like the United States or possibly Israel. And we'll give you some reflection prompts you can use immediately with your own team or clients. So we're not here about theory. Culture, context is the operating system of transformation in practice. So as a psychologist and an executive coach, I've had a front row seat to human potential and to the invisible things that stop people just short of it. I've seen brilliant leaders who had great strategies but couldn't break through. Those people were not missing skill or intelligence. They were trapped in the wrong paradigm. One company I worked with, still working with, changed everything. New leadership, new processes, heavy investment in tech. But 6 months later, behavior hadn't budged. They'd changed content, not context. Sorry, I didn't mean to change that slide. So that's when I realized transformation isn't about what we change, it's about where we're operating from. So there are three myths we're going to talk about today, three myths about transformation. One, that transformation is a big change. Two, that results can come from what you're doing and what you're having and what you have rather than from who you're being. And the final myth that context is fixed. So, myth number one, transformation is big change. It's not. It's not a bigger version of change. It isn't quantitative. It isn't even qualitative. It's ontological. Ontological means it starts from being, and it changes being. Think of it this way. Think about the buggy whip manufacturers who kept perfecting their craft of making better buggy whips, while at the same time Carl Benz was inventing the automobile. They made better buggy whips. That's hard to say, by the way. They made better buggy whips. He created a whole new world of transportation. Change makes a new version. Transformation creates a new reality. When you're transforming, you're not improving what was, you're rewriting what's possible. I'm watching for any questions if your hand goes up or if you're on the chat. The second myth, results come from doing and having. So we need to make a distinction here that isn't often made. And those of you that I've worked with will be familiar with it, but if not, it may be new. There are three spheres of being, let's call them, three theaters of being, being. There's being, there's doing, and there's having. Now, most of the time, and in the default culture of human beings and organizations, we focus on doing and having. That if we do work harder, work smarter, those are doing, we'll have better results. The truth is, being is contextual to doing and having. Being creates doing and having, who you're being. In fact, one of the clues to that is you'll hear people, especially when I was a therapist and as a coach, people will argue for their own limitations. They'll say, that's just who I am. No, that's not who you are. That's who you learned to be. In fact, in the second of this series of free webinars, we're going to talk about how you learn to be a certain way. I call it the perfect storm. That'll be next month. But the myth says if I do the right things and have the right resources, I'll get the results I want. But it's actually the other way around. Who I'm being limits what I can do and the results I get. And so you'll see this referred to sometimes as mindset. I was on a call the other day with a group of people, and we were talking about marketing. And this one woman who's a terrific at what she does, she actually works with people to improve their health, with women to improve their health. And we were talking about putting herself out there and marketing and advertising and like that to get a bigger audience. And she said, oh, well, I'm not the best at what I do. The people who train me are the best at what I do. I'm maybe second best. Oscar Wilde said, argue for your limitations and they're yours. She was arguing for her limitations. As long as she is unwilling to constitute herself as an expert, as the best, as the person you should go to for what she offers, she's going to limit. She's going to communicate, first of all, that she's not that good. And second of all, she's going to limit her outreach. See, athletes are athletes long before they become champions. All champions are athletes, but not all athletes are champions, because those who have a limiting mindset, a limiting paradigm, a limiting context, these are all terms for the same thing, will hold themselves back. Most leaders try to get to being from doing. That's swimming upstream. They work harder, they push more processes, they measure more metrics, but nothing fundamental changes because the being hasn't changed. Their being hasn't changed. Once being changes, doing and having reorganize themselves. Now, this isn't philosophy, it's mechanics. It's how things actually work. For myself, I about the beginning of this year, I realized that I was working very hard and was dependent on referrals for getting new business, and that was giving me, I had to sell myself to the people that were referring, and then I had to sell myself to the client. I was doing double work. So I got a marketing coach and changed my whole approach to presenting myself as the expert in the field. I had just published my book. It was an ideal time to do it. And my how hard I work and how many hours I work and what I work on, once I shifted from I get my business from referrals to I generate business through my authority, my expertise, everything changed. How hard I worked, what I worked on, everything else. So that's the second myth. If you want to change culture, and by culture, I mean organizational or individual. I worked with SED's organization about, what is it now, about 4 or 5 years ago, SED? And this is what we worked on, was altering the being of the organization to a culture of collaboration, communication, engagement, and partnership. From that, doing and having followed. The third myth, context is fixed. It's not changeable. It's a background you have to work within. The truth is, context is a field, and you can design it. The early physicist, I'm lousy with dates, but it was probably 16th, 17th century, Michael Faraday came up with the idea of fields, that there were invisible forces that shape visible outcomes. Again, a simple analogy. Take a bunch of iron filings, scatter them on a piece of paper, and they're all over the place. Put a magnetic field, a magnet under the paper, and the filings line up automatically with the magnet. Magnetism is a field. Gravity is a field. It determines what's possible and what's not possible, and what you have to do to stretch the possibility. The airplane doesn't defy gravity, but it stretches the possibility of gravity to allow flying at 30,000 feet if you're willing to pay the cost in fuel, etc. Context is the invisible field, culture is the invisible field of leadership that makes certain results possible and others impossible, and certain results more probable and others less probable. And you create context through language. When someone, simple example, again, when a couple walk down the aisle of a church or a city hall or in front of a judge or a minister, as they walk down the aisle at the beginning of the ceremony, they're single. When they turn around and walk back up the aisle, they're married. Any of you who have been married know that married and single are two very different cultures. So what made the difference was simply that somebody said something. A minister or a judge or a justice of the peace said, "I pronounce you husband and wife." That's all that happened. And it changed the entire context, the entire culture in which those two people lived in relationship. When somebody walks into a job interview, they're not, and they don't work for that company. When someone says to them, "You're hired," it changes everything. So language is critical. It's how you create new contexts. I have a client in Botswana where SED is, not his company, but a different one, where I've been working there for about 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. And the first thing we did was to take the CEO and his direct reports off on a retreat, away from the office, up in a remote area. And we worked with them for 4 days. And all we did with them for those 4 days was have them examine the context in which they were operating as a team with each other and as a leadership team for the organization. And to have them, through communication, through commitment, alter their relationship with each other and design a culture for the organization. When I say design a culture, I don't mean anything abstract. At the end of that 4 days, they came away with 11 cultural practices. See, that translates be into do. 11 practices, specific behaviors that reflect the culture they were designing. The next thing they did was they appointed people from all over their organization, champions for the new culture. We took them away for 4 days, a year later, and they trained them in how to communicate and how to create commitment to the new culture and through teaching the cultural practices. Now we're working with the incoming CEO, who was in the original work we did and is now going to take over the leadership of the new culture. And we're working intensively with him on a personal transformation and on leading that new culture. The title of my book, thank you, Tal. The title of my book is Transformation from Potential to Practice. And one of the things I emphasize in that book is that transformation, or designing a culture, takes practice over time in community. All three of those elements are crucial. There's got to be practice. Almost every organization we work with, we end up designing something like those cultural practices. It's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Transformation is not an event. It's a process. It requires training. It requires the willingness to make mistakes and learn from one's mistakes. And it's done in community. One of the things we create when we work with an executive team, like we did with the team in Botswana, is we create committed partnerships where people are actually openly, verbally make promises about being committed to each other's success and coaching each other. Context is malleable, it's changeable, and it doesn't change by itself. So that third myth, that culture is fixed, is one that and it's especially, as I said earlier, it's especially critical at the individual level, because when we say that's just who I am, or that's just how I am, I can't change. You know, I'm a jealous person, or I'm an angry person, or I'm a fearful person. We, by saying it, by declaring it, we reinforce it and we make it so. We say, oh, I can't change. My context, my being is fixed, but it's not. So, what does it look like in action? Well, a leader I worked with declared to his team, we are a culture of ownership, not oversight. In other words, what they discovered in this organization was that there was way too much management and not enough leadership. Management, the way I use the term, means you're looking over people's shoulders, making sure they're doing it right and telling them, and if they make too many mistakes, you take it away from them. Ownership means you give them they're fully empowered to get the job done. You make the resources they need available, including coaching, including training, whatever. And then you set the context, the being, and you commit to the outcomes you want, and you let them discover the path to go from culture to outcomes on their own. This was a very powerful declaration. We're a culture of ownership, not oversight, that changed everything. Meetings shortened, accountability increased, innovation emerged, not because he introduced new KPIs or a new dashboard, but because the context in which people were working shifted. So, your turn. Hang on, I want to see what Eduardo says here. In business, can we say that context is like the operating system of an organization made up? Yes. Yes, exactly, Eduardo. Context is the operating system, and it's either there by design or default. That's exactly right. So, your turn. Think of an area where you keep trying to do something differently and end up with the same result. What might be the context that's underlying that pattern? You can either come off mute and talk about it, or you can put it in chat. But what's an area where, I'll say it either personally or as a leader, you feel stuck? No matter what you do, it keeps coming out the same. And then what might be the context that's underlying or undermining that pattern. Kevin, come off mute and tell me what you mean. Followers' beliefs about what it takes to succeed.
It's like an upper limiting manual. And you talk about like somebody's.
Hang on a second, Tal. I just want to hear from Kevin. I'll be right there. Go ahead.
My thought is that the role of the leader is profoundly important in charting the course and setting the mood and mode of what happens in the organization. Another variable in that picture is what the employee population believes matters about how to succeed within that organization. So the leader needs to pay attention not only to what he or she wants to achieve by making that change, but also how to grab the hearts and minds of those he or she is trying to influence.
Very good.
What I've seen an awful lot of organizations do change, do change work that is limited by not doing that hearts and minds kind of work, but rather trying to manage the process through speeches and emails.
It's very good. And it reflects something important that I talk about in the book. Management, as we know it, is rooted in the work of Frederick Taylor back in the, I guess, 1920s.
20s.
And Taylor's fundamental assumption was, I'm oversimplifying, but not by much. Nobody wants to work. If you don't watch them, they won't work. And that particular frame, that context or that way of thinking will create its own reality. If you treat people like they don't want to work, they will not want to work. Yeah, very good. Tal, what were you going to say?
Earlier about like an upper limiting, the question that you were saying. Can you return to this question before the sharing? You asked about an area of our lives that we are repeatedly.
Yeah. That's what we're talking about now. You got an example?
I have one.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
In my
Perfect.
company, we have been trying different strategies to grow.
Eduardo, I need you to talk a little louder.
Okay. In my company, we have been doing and trying different strategies to grow through sales and mentorships, pop-up partnerships, but the results repeat. So how can we operate from a context of urgency or needing to prove ourselves? Do we shifting a team organization or strategy? How do we shift the context of a team when we keep getting the same results?
Mm-hmm. Well, what would you guess if there were an underlying assumption, something along the lines of, I'm going to guess it's about your customers. What would you guess that underlying assumption is?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's
What's your product? What do you sell?
art.
Art?
Yes.
Okay.
Works of art.
What kind of people buy art?
We're aiming to corporations, individual clients, art collectors, aficionados.
Let me ask it differently. Why do people need art?
To get beauty in their life to change
Okay.
their perception.
So what are you really selling?
A different view.
You're selling beauty.
Yeah.
What do you advertise?
That we sell beauty.
Do you, or do you advertise art?
Art.
Yeah, well, so, I read something the other day that said if you listen to your customers, you'll be very successful. If you talk to your customers, you'll be less successful. So it might be worth finding out from your customers why they buy your product. Because your assumptions about what you're selling, see, art particularly is not a commodity. Now, I would have the same conversation. In fact, I think I remember having it with Sed, who sells diamonds. Why do people buy diamonds? Same question. If you don't know why your customer, if you don't get really interested in why your customers are buying, and if you do get interested in that, you're likely to find out that some of your assumptions are wrong, or maybe even worse than wrong. They're sending you in a wrong direction in terms of how you communicate the value of your product. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's certainly could go that way. Anybody else? Where do you see something you've been trying to do differently and keep getting the same result? And what might be the assumption underlying that?
Hi, Ed, can I come in?
Of course.
Yeah, just quickly, I think one it's a couple of reflections. One it's a story of Paul O'Neill. You remember Paul O'Neill? So one of the American executive, and the story is narrated in The Power of Habit. So this long story short is that part of his transformation was that when and this is quite important and links with what you say, he changed the context of the organization. The organization was not doing well. A lot of safety incident. So when he came in, people thought he would talk about the market and everything, and all he said, worker safety. And you recall that he was one of the successful executives for the company, where the market cap grew from 3 billion to 27 billion, because he changed the way people looked at, and productivity started going up. There was a lot of buying.
How would you summarize the change from what to what?
So the change for me, and in simple terms, was about ownership. And it's the simplifying way of saying accountability, right from all workers on the shopping floor to leadership, and understanding that as a manager, as a leader, I have a huge responsibility to ensure that I create an environment where people can work safely, and also to flip it around rather than saying, I need to do work and what about safety? But it's about how can I do the work safely? So that's one aspect. So the second one that I wanted to relate to was our organization. I'm no longer with Debswana Ed, with the Diamond Trading. So when we came up with a new strategy, we all acknowledge that a lot of times the strategies fail from executing that strategy. Part of executing the strategy is the change management part of it. So what we did was that we ensured that we actually train people so that we have a shared understanding of how to manage change. And how, for me, it helped was that I remember this moment vividly when the union chairperson came to me and said, this is, you said to us that we need to manage change this way. And I'm seeing this is how far you are going. And I don't think we are on that track. And we are actually have a high risk of actually failing. So that changing the context of the organization, as you put it. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, you reminded me of another example. This was from early in my career. I was working with a chemical company, a plant in the southern United States, and they had a terrible safety record. And chemicals, like mining, like other industries I work in, safety is always an issue. And I was facilitating a meeting. The executives had literally given up. They had turned the problem over to a works council, a council of foreman, higher level line workers in the factory. And I was facilitating. They brought me in to facilitate that meeting, and these people were debating. No, nobody questioned safety is important. What they were debating was criteria. How many work, lost time accidents would constitute an emergency. In other words, if 3 people in a week got hurt versus 2 people in a week versus 5 people in a week, where do we draw the line and say something's got to, we got to stop and retread? And finally, this one woman who had been in the company forever, she was a foreman on the shop floor. She stopped everything. She literally banged her hand on the table and said, "This is ridiculous." She said, "These are people we've worked with. These are people our families know, we go to church with, our kids go to school with, and we're debating how many of them is it okay to be injured or killed, and before we take action." She said, "The only possible answer is 0." Now, in the chemical industry, 0 is considered not possible. It's the context, the culture in that industry is that accidents, even deaths, are inevitable. So the first reaction from everybody was just that. "Hey, that's not possible. What are you talking about?" She said, "No. If you go to a party and you have something to eat and you take your plate and you go to the kitchen to set it, to get rid of it, and the sink is full of dishes, dirty dishes, what do? You add yours to the pile of dirty dishes. But if the sink is clean, empty, you wash your plate." She said, if the criterion is 0, then at the first accident, we're going to wake up. If the criterion is 5, the first 4 don't count. We wake up on the 5th. Now that's a paradigm shift around safety that makes all the difference in the world. The lost time accident rate in that chemical plant went down dramatically. I don't have the numbers at hand, but went down dramatically. One place to look for yourself individually or for an organization is if there is a problem that persists despite the best efforts to fix it. Chances are it's not going to get fixed by changing what you do or what you have, like better safety equipment. It's going to be a cultural or at an individual level, a being problem, a limiting belief problem. So here's the question. if what we've talked about today resonates, if you're ready to move from leading change to leading transformation, there are two ways forward. You're more than welcome to. We do a program for senior executives called Designing Culture by Design. It's a CEO roundtable. The next one is going to be sometime after the first of the year. We do it on a private ranch in Arizona. That's one possibility. If you're a consultant, well, actually, there's three. I left one over. If you're ready to lead transformation with yourself, find a coach who specializes in transformational work. If you're a consultant, as I know some of you on this call are, get fluent, get conversant with transformation, with shifting not just client behavior, but their being. So we've got a few minutes left. We've got about 10 minutes left. Let's open the floor. What do you see? What questions do you have, including, what about this? Would it work here? What does it look like? Anything on the be, do, have, culture, design, or what it takes to lead transformation. Just come off mute and let's talk.
Well, Ed, sorry, I have a challenge meeting potential clients. I meet them, they tell me what they're in what situation they are in, and also what they want. I have worked with transformation for quite some years now, but they are not accustomed to this definition. They want change. They want help with change management. And I know what they really need. And I have a problem to sort of describe what transformation is in that particular situation. And it's a pitch. I don't have many minutes, right? So do you guys have any ideas? What is what can...
This
I mean, what is the explanation?
This is what I say, Thomas, this is my elevator pitch. You ready?
Yeah.
I'm not here to help you stay comfortable in your current frame. I'm here to break the frame so that you create a new future that you now can't even imagine. Interested?
Wow. That's a good one. Is this recorded? Can I get it?
You've got to educate them and wake them up at the same time. People are steeped in the idea that if you just change what you do and what you have, things will change. And they will to some extent. But, if you remember, let's see, it must have been in the 90s, I think, 1990s, there was a movement called business process reengineering. That was originated, the idea came from a man named Michael Hammer, who's passed on since then. And the idea was, if you change it was very straightforward. If you change what you do, and you'll change what you have. It didn't work. And one of the reasons I have enormous respect for Michael Hammer is he actually wrote a journal article admitting that it didn't work.
And making an apology.
This in my book. Say it again, Pete.
And making an apology.
And making an apology. Exactly right.
Yeah.
And the reason he didn't quite say why it didn't work, but as now I got to admit, I'm a transformation guy, so obviously I'm going to see transformation. But it just completely didn't, it said it perfectly. Process. If you look at be, do, have, being is context, doing is process, having is results. He called it business process reengineering. Well, there's an old saying, if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting what we're getting. And so The difference was culture. So my experience over 40 plus years, Thomas, has been that somewhere people know that that just for themselves, for individuals, they know they have limiting beliefs. Like the woman on the call the other day, I'm not the best. That's a limiting belief. That's not true. Well, I learned from other people, so I must not be the best. No, people exceed their teachers all the time. So I approach it as limiting beliefs and limiting beliefs at an organizational level. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I can also, I think I hear also that I shouldn't adjust too much to the person on the other side of the table.
Yeah, you've got to be pretty. And again, this is cultural. I mean, Sweden is not a super direct culture,
Exactly.
but
We have a cultural law also, you know that?
lagom.
That yeah, that's one of them, and you shouldn't think that you are better than anyone else. That's a cultural law in Sweden.
Jantelägen.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't stand out from the crowd.
Mhm.
Well, you know what? You and I met through our mutual colleague Johan Blad,
Yeah.
and Johan is as unswedish a Swede as I know, because he's extremely direct. I think to some extent you got to be willing to challenge them.
Yeah.
And you won't do it in a way that, well, you'll do it in a way that either puts people off or it doesn't. But you know what? There's way more business out there than you're ever going to get.
Absolutely.
So if you lose a few
Definitely.
because they're not ready to work with you, and I've had a number this year. I've had a number of conversations with CEOs who loved what I had to say and weren't ready to implement it. So let it cook with them and take the ones that are ready.
Yeah.
Anything else before we close? So, closing thought. Culture isn't something you have. It's something you live and practice every day by design or by default. You don't have any choice about it. You're going to practice some culture, design or default. Default seems to work better in most cases. Design, rather, seems to work better in most cases. Few next steps. One, I'd love to continue the conversation. If you're interested in working with me, I coach and train and mentor coaches as well as executives. Be happy to have a conversation with you. Go to that URL or just take scan that QR code. That'll take you to that URL and you can get an hour in my schedule and we'll talk. I have two groups on one on Facebook and one on LinkedIn, and they're both called the same. Just a second. Is Leading with Purpose and Impact. They're free. They're by invitation, but if you want an invitation, go on either platform. The groups are called the same. Or let me know and I'll send you an invitation. I'm going to be doing one of these the third Wednesday of every month for the next several months, at least through the beginning of next year. And I'm going to focus on aspects of transformation. The next one will be on, as I said earlier, on the perfect storm, how we form individually our own limiting perceptions. And if you want to buy my book and read it, that would be a good thing too. So,
Talk to Tal. Talk to Tal.
Dr. Tal. Tal's
Talk to Tal.
scalping my book. I want to say one last thing, and then we're going to end on time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Ellie, Quentin, you and I haven't met before. I'd love to get to know you better. Eduardo, you as well. I am here as a resource for you or anybody else that you'd care to recommend, and I hope I'll see you back on the next free webinar, and I will let you know when the recording of this one is available. In the meantime,
Before you go, just quick second, there will be invitees from my communities like Eli Yahalom and others all the time, and we will talk about it later. But
Great, perfect.
We're recording it and we're sharing it, and Shmulik is on the line.
I'll get you the recording. I have it.
Yeah, and Shmulik, my partner, is on the line as well. So there's a lot of, and Eduardo, who we work with. So there's a lot of openings.
Fabulous. And thanks all of you for being here. And I hope I'll see you again in the very near future. In the meantime, be well, be safe, be happy.
Thank you.
Bye.